those who try to use it to become gods. Israel uses sophisticated attack jets and naval vessels to bomb densely crowded refugee camps, schools, apartment blocks, mosques, and slums, to attack a population that has no air force, no air defense, no navy, no heavy weapons, no artillery units, no mechanized armor, no command and control, no army, and calls it a war. It is not a war. It is murder. Images of dead Palestinian children lined up as if asleep on the floor of the main hospital in Gaza are a metaphor for the future. Israel will, from now on, speak to the Palestinians in the language of death. The incursion. Those who orchestrate such sieges do not grasp the terrible rage born of long humiliation, indiscriminate violence, and abuse. A father or a mother whose child dies because of a lack of vaccines or proper medical care does not forget. A boy whose ill grandmother dies while being detained at an Israeli checkpoint does not forget. Families who carry the broken bodies of their children to hospitals do not forget. All who endure humiliation, abuse, and the murder of those they love do not forget. This rage becomes a virus within those who eventually stumble out into the daylight. Is it any wonder that 71% of children interviewed at a school in Gaza recently said they wanted to be a martyr? The refusal by our political leaders, from Barack Obama to all but 5 members of Congress, to the major media, to speak out in defense of the rule of law and fundamental human rights exposes our cowardice and our hypocrisy. The public debate about the Gaza attack engages in the absurd pretense that it is Israel, not the Palestinians, whose security and dignity.
When finished, press the pound key.
All right, hold on for a second, folks.
To start your show now, press 1. To hear important.
Since it appears you're calling back into a live show, we are reconnecting you now.
All right, they managed to basically take me off of the air. They knew what I was going to play. They knew what I was planning on doing here. They heard what I already set up for. Well, you're going to hear this again, because I'm going to go back and play this and share this with you. You need to understand. And before I'm through here today, I'm really going to point out who is responsible for this. And it may surprise you, folks. It may surprise you because
The incursion.
it's not just the Jews here. It's not just the Jews in Israel, the Zionists in Israel, the Ashkenazi bastard from Khazar, warlike people with no soul, no heart. They don't care about you. They'll kill, and they hide behind the Jews the same way they hide behind you Christians. And this is what I'm going to talk about here. And when I talk about Christians, I'm not talking about my friend Jake Wade, who's a pastor, who's the dean of the Timothy Bible College, who wrote his own 501c3, who has tried, he calls the Bible his answer book. And in the right hands it is. In the wrong hands, it's in the hands of Moloch, it's the hands of Satan, it's the hands of that Baal, the demon Baal, who poses as your God, your Christian God. Now, what's happening in there, as I told you earlier here in this film, and you can hear the whole film, or most of it, on Blog Talk Radio, but They knocked me off of that too. They knocked me off of that. No guest today. I'm more dangerous by myself than I am with a guest here. Because I tell you the truth, I shoot straight with you. I don't lie and I don't steal. I've been to prison for smoking marijuana, for providing marijuana to friends, along with 60 million other people here that have. This war on drugs is a war on the American people. I've been telling you that forever. Now this war on drugs, now it's going to be homeless. It's going to be illegal to be homeless after they've kicked you out of your home. Well, now you're a criminal. They're going to do the same thing to you with guns. Oh, you got a gun? Whoa, you didn't turn that in? Wow, you didn't declare that? Whoa, you're going to be a criminal. Ayn Rand was absolutely right. Oh, the government has no control over honest citizens, so they got to make criminals out of you. Well, the kind of criminals they're making are like me. They tried to make me homeless. They tried to take away my family. They tried to destroy me. They tried to destroy every source of income. And when some bitch put up, I love Israel, Sharon Darrington, you bitch, you low-life bitch, you put up on a Texas, we're gonna do grand juries in Texas, but we need to support Israel. What a bitch! What a false! What a traitor! What a traitor! And I got attacked for what? I support Israel. Well, I support Israel. Well, of course, we all support Israel here. Because Americans out there, real Americans are out there trying to figure out how they're going to get a job. They're sweeping the streets. They're trying to do whatever they can to get along, to save their families, to save their homes. And they don't have time to get on that internet and promote Israel, you low-life bitch. Dave Hodges is one of those people that have spoken up. He's appeared, his articles appeared many times. He is the author of the article in this issue of the Free American, the July issue of the Free American. Yeah, and I probably should be starting on the August issue right now. But the July issue got UN tanks on the cover, and this is what they're doing. This is why they're bringing the illegals in here. The Border Patrol will tell you that the UN is in charge of the border. And I told you the little story about Casey Nettercott wanting to help me. He had a 70-acre ranch across from the river from a UN base that they were building in Mexico. He was stopping the illegals coming across, turning them over to the ICE and to the Border Patrol. And then he invited me down, and they shot him. Chris Hodges, come on back.
And bombardment of Gaza is not about destroying Hamas. It is not about stopping rocket fire into Israel. It is not about achieving peace. The Israeli decision to rain death and destruction on Gaza, to use lethal weapons of the modern battlefield on a largely defenseless civilian population, is the final phase in the decades-long campaign to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. The assault on Gaza is about creating squalid, lawless, and impoverished ghettos in the West Bank and Gaza, where life for Palestinians will be barely sustainable. It is about building a series of ringed Palestinian enclaves where the Israeli military will have the ability to instantly shut off movement, food, medicine, and goods to perpetuate the misery. Privilege and power, especially military power, is a dangerous narcotic. Violence destroys those who bear the brunt of its force, but also those who try to use it to become gods. Israel uses sophisticated attack jets and naval vessels to bomb densely crowded refugee camps, schools, apartment blocks, mosques, and slums, to attack a population that has no Air Force, no air defense, no Navy, no heavy weapons, no artillery units, no mechanized armor, no command and control, no army, and calls it a war. It is not a war. It is murder. Images of dead Palestinian children lined up as if asleep on the floor of the main hospital in Gaza are a metaphor for the future. Israel will from now on speak to the Palestinians in the language of death. Those who orchestrate such sieges do not grasp the terrible rage born of long humiliation, indiscriminate violence, and abuse. A father or a mother whose child dies because of a lack of vaccines or proper medical care does not forget. A boy whose ill grandmother dies while being detained at an Israeli checkpoint does not forget. Families who carry the broken bodies of their children to hospitals do not forget. All who endure humiliation, abuse, and the murder of those they love do not forget. This rage becomes a virus within those who eventually stumble out into the daylight. Is it any wonder that 71% of children interviewed at a school in Gaza recently said they wanted to be a martyr? The refusal by our political leaders, from Barack Obama to all but 5 members of Congress, to the major media, to speak out in defense of the rule of law and fundamental human rights exposes our cowardice and our hypocrisy. The public debate about the Gaza attack engages in the absurd pretense that it is Israel, not the Palestinians, whose security and dignity is being threatened. This blind defense of Israeli brutality towards the Palestinians is a betrayal of the memory of all those killed in other genocides in other times. The lesson of the Holocaust is not that Jews are special. It is not that Jews are unique. It is not that Jews are eternal victims. The lesson of the Holocaust is that when you have the capacity to halt genocide, and you do not, no matter who carries out that genocide or who it is directed against, you are culpable. And we are very culpable. The F-16 fighter jets, the Apache attack helicopters, the 250-pound smart GBU-39 bombs are all part of the $3 billion military aid we give to Israel. Palestinians are being killed tonight with American-made weapons. But perhaps our callous indifference to human suffering is to be expected. We, after all, kill women and children on an even vaster scale in Iraq and Afghanistan.
I want you to go to free Facebook, www.facebook.com/Free American 69. And I want you to see the images that is playing on this film, Gaza the Brokenhearted by Chris Hodges. I want you to see our enemy, the Jew. Right below that, for you Christians, that love Israel, you are just as responsible for this as the Jews. And right below that statement, I've got a picture of a Palestinian man holding his baby with its brain missing from the back of his head, blown off. No brain inside the baby's body. The Palestinian man is in tears, and you can watch his horror, his tragedy, his grief, and tell me you love Israel. I hope that I meet Sharon Darrington sometime. She's just up in Victoria, because I will slap her silly. I will knock her to the ground. I don't care if I go to jail. You love Israel. You want to attack? We want to attack. Like, now I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about little Israel controls America, which is why we should call it America with a K. Police state America is a result of Jewish control. Your country has been taken over by Jews. The Jew and the state are not the same thing. Albert J. Knox's famous book, Our Enemy, the State, ought to be renamed Our Enemy, the Jew. What no one knows is that the Jew and the state have always been the same. The reason that is that the belief in Moses, the lawgiver, is the establishment of state in your mind, that the state is an outgrowth of law, the state is a nebulous collection of laws and controls administered through courts. And people are starting to wake up now about these courts, about the control of the attorneys. They live in the city of London. The Queen has to ask permission to come in there. And the 13th Amendment, oh my God, folks, what we need that 13th Amendment. We fought a war to take it away. We fought a war to take it away. They don't want you having that 13th Amendment. What is it? What is it? It is, it abolishes, and it just gives a little bit of teeth to our thing in the Constitution that says titles of nobility aren't allowed to serve in Congress, in any offices. They don't want, they've tried to do that. They've tried to do that. Now, yeah, that's right. Somebody shared my status. I've told you about these Ebola things. Now we know why they moved Ebola patients to the U.S. That's the next plan. That is part of the plan here, folks. And let me see what this is here. Nope. Page ain't found. Okay. When we examine, now this is why Jews rule. When we examine this Jewish takeover of the West, we have to, unfortunately, talk about the Bible and Christianity. How could this tiny minority take over all of Christendom? That seems impossible, but they did it right under our noses, practically undetected. The reason is surreptitiously simple. They slithered past your consciousness because of your belief system. The Jew is camouflaged because of the dominant myth and the belief in Jesus Christ and the Jews as God's chosen holy ones. The Jew made it inside the gates by deception. His invisibility cloak was his book. Now, this author is called Yukon Jack, and I don't agree with him in its entirety. I do agree that the so-called Christian churches of John Hagee, of Pat Robertson, all these Christian preachers that make their sabbaticals so they can worship at the holy wall, so they can touch the holy wall, so they can emulate their Jewish masters. Yes, there's something wrong with that kind of Christianity. The good Christians, the people that really know the Bible, like Dr. Jake Wade, should not be counted in that. And just like I don't believe every Jew is evil, I don't care who your grandmother slept with. I don't believe every Jew is evil, and I don't believe every Christian is evil, because John Hagee is. So, in this article, in what I'm saying here, and what I'm sharing with you today, I'm telling you what they have done is try to turn the Christians against me, because I got in this because of the slaughter of Christians at Waco. And they tried to do the same thing that they do with the Palestinians there. Well, they're the terrorists, Those people in Waco, well, they deserved what they got. What did those 17 little children do to deserve being murdered? What did a little Palestinian baby with the back of its head blown off that I've got up on Facebook, what did he do to deserve that? Did you know that smart bomb that you sent over there to blow up an apartment building would kill that baby? Well, they may have, but all of you Christians may not. Now, every town in America has one or more Christian churches, and Jake Wade talked about those Christian churches having a Masonic cornerstone on it. Now, America is America, the police state, and this didn't happen because corporations took over. Those corporations are owned and controlled by Jews. I wish Mike Rivera would quit saying the corporate-controlled media, because that's an outright deception. It's a Jewish-controlled media. And back on Genesis Radio, Mike has joined Alex Jones in playing Zionist Christian converted America. Never talk about the real problem, the Jewish problem, because that's offensive to the Christian audiences. The Christians think the Bible is about love, but they're confused because the Bible is about egoic control using the God mem. There is no judging God demanding your obedience. There's only men in ego consciousness demanding you to obey the law that they write. God casts no law on us. The Bible is a ruse. There's no external God caring about what we do. The Jewish God is a ruse that the Jews are using, not God. That should be obvious, but apparently not, because you're not even willing to talk about it, let alone do something about it. The dark cloud over America is this system of Jewish control where criminally insane Jews make a law and pass it down. You're taught to pray like Jesus. The Son of God had to pray to God, which doesn't even make sense if they're the same thing. Regardless, you're taught to pray to something external to self for salvation and solutions to everyday problems. That way you give up your personal authority to external authority. And remember what Jesus told you: you can do what I do and more. The state, you're giving up to external authority, the state and the church. But the state and church are parasites that are carving up the world for their own wealth and privilege. You've been deceived by the Jewish Bible, and you hold it dear because it is a spell in your mind. The Jew is in your head. And a perfect example of that would be the Schofield Bible, with all of the footnotes added to the Bible, the Jewish translation of what God is. God is real, folks. God is the force, and it's an intelligent force, I believe, that created your DNA, the double-headed serpent, and all of the myths, even the Bible stories that you got in here. They try to tell you the truth as best they can, but everything's a two-headed sword. The Bible established authority in the minds of the people. From this authority, the church, then the modern state, evolved. But now the state is beast for having gathered authority upon itself, armed with modern weapons and sophisticated propaganda techniques where every truth is inverted. The state wages endless war by deception. Nothing is real anymore because we are inside the mind of an insane Neanderthal who is applying his tribal book on us. The Jews have established territory in your mind, and there's a little Israeli colony in your head. The Jew is driving you mad. Most of you are paying for redemption to a Jewish God while the Jew tears the earth up. Yeah, Dr. D-Charge in the chat room says, imagine if every dollar was figured in our Social Security plan now, instead of allowing every penny over $117,000 to go in the pocket of the crooks. LWW says it's stunning how ignorant the Christian Zionists are. John Rich, Big and Rich, retweeted an IDF propaganda tweet. Imagine how many homeless veterans, LWW says, how many homeless veterans we could feed and house with that $3 billion in aid that is used for genocide. And he wants more, he wants more. He wants billions because they're flying all these illegal aliens in. Oh, just another excuse. Just another excuse. So here we are in 2014. In the middle of a huge worldwide Jewish crisis, and most commentators won't even talk about the Jew. That is cowardly and pathetic. It is insane and suicidal. It's the Jews, you morons. It's your damn religion that has you spellbound, a spellbound state that you can't even talk about your own tragedy. How bad do things have to get before you openly state the traitors among us? How many kids have to die in Gaza and elsewhere because you couldn't find the resolve to say the Jew word? Say the word Jew. Go ahead. Say it out loud. Spell it out loud. J-E-W. Now, why have most people given up and are spineless sheeple, totally caving in to the criminal institutions that parasite off of all of us? Why don't you fight back? Why don't you investigate what's really going on? The reason is that the individual is conquered and owned by what they believe when they believe in authority. Oh yeah, the ruler is God's servant to help you. Oh, right. And remember what Paul said. And remember that Paul was a Pharisee that Jesus hated. So why would Jesus make him an apostle? Why would Paul start speaking? Tex Mars hasn't spoken to me, helped me, or done anything for me since I brought this up. Be a good servant. Be a good slave. Don't rebel against your masters. That's your Jewish controlled Bible. Now there are good words in there. I mean, this is why Thomas Jefferson took out all the words of all the other prophets and just made the Thomas Jefferson Bible with the words of Jesus in it. Now, how is this authority established? By school indoctrination and Bible study. If you ever gain consciousness again, you might realize that an authentic holy book would tell you to remain autonomous and instruct you not to be a ward of the state. An authentic holy book would instruct you how to be an individual and avoid all the pitfalls of control. Freedom and holy should be synonyms, but the Bible, holy is demonic because holy is associated with Yahweh and the Jew. Yeah, I'm God and you're not. The Bible establishes authority so that you can voluntarily submit to rule by the state. Boy, they know that well, don't you? We have the most successful voluntary income tax out there. And folks, that's why I am and I practice being a free American. I'd like to have a few more of us around. I'd like that. But you won't support me. You won't back me. You're listening to this. You can go to freeamerican.com. You can make a donation. You could help out. You could reward somebody that has the balls to stand up to these murderous bastards that killed the children in Waco, that are killing the children in Gaza. I am standing up for freedom. I am standing up for the Palestinians, who are probably the real descendants of the tribes of Israel, the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Dan, and they're murdering them. What no one tells you is that this criminal, deadly pyramid of hierarchical power is all achieved by the holy book you read. If you never read the Bible, you would never submit to the policeman. You wouldn't even recognize him or his assertion of authority. You would see the police as dangerous armed thugs asserting authority which they don't have. But you don't see the police that way. You run to the police for help when you should be running away and getting a gun so that you are on equal footing with these degenerate horrors of the state. I got kicked off one station because my wife's a policeman. My wife's a policeman. Well, that's not exactly a fatal mistake. You can come out with it. The police used to be our servants to protect and to serve. But I raised my sons and I told them, don't, if you got a problem, if you're in trouble, don't flag down a cop, flag down a biker. He'll help you. The courts and the police and law are all foreign to a free human being. No normal human raised outside this deep, dark, demonic pool of biblical indoctrination, Jewish indoctrination, would ever voluntarily consent to outside authority. It is only the heathen, anarchist, or the dirty, godless hippie, or the bohemian artist that has any chance even to have an inkling that something is amiss, like your freedom. All art is resistance to the Jew, Borg, hive mind, fascist, monotheistic culture that has your mind in lockdown as they pry taxes from you because you happen to use the fraudulent money they circulate. The free thinker and the pot-smoking hippie who openly defies the law are your only hope. With them, you can actually see something that resembles freedom as you climb out of your bloated RSUV gas hog and travel to your air-conditioned domicile, cage, and pay dozens of bills and taxes that the system throws at you monthly. We are so far gone, we accept our slavery with false smiles and then go to church and ask Jesus to forgive us for being alive. The American culture is a gigantic Jew, open-air, zombified, death cult prison. Jesus to forgive us for being alive, it's not worth saving. Maybe we should just burn it to the ground while we rid ourselves of the Jew parasite. It's an acceptable loss because there's no loss. Freedom from the shackles of Jew parasitism. The tree of liberty must be renewed at any cost, and if some blood is spilled, so what? Look at how much blood is already being spilled. What is worth saving in a slave state? It's that bad, folks. We are in a Jew-created hell, according to Yukon Jack, by reading the Bible, and you can't see it. You think being holy is godly. It's the cause of the bloodshed and the depravity. Every bomb that rains down on the hapless Palestinians was delivered by the belief in the loving God of Jesus. The Jews right in your face, killing innocent women and children. He's on the Jew tube, spewing his lies of hatred, and you do nothing. Well, how about you start doing something? Get rid of the goddamn Jew we have in our hands, and nothing in this universe forces you to hold it, let alone read it. Now, I don't agree with that. I think you should read the Bible, and I think you should recognize that along with all of the good that Jesus tried to pass on to you, all of the good that he tried to do, he tried to solve the problem we got today. How do you fight evil without becoming evil? Now, this is what I've tried to do. This is what I've tried to tell you. Well, LWW is asking, Clay, was it the local police or FBI that ambushed Bill Cooper? It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. Because the whole thing, when they passed that Senate Bill 1959, and I'm not sure what date that was, they rolled the police force, the local police force, into the Homeland Security. They designated people like me as a homegrown terrorist, and that's what led to the formation of the fusion centers. So that the FBI, so that the DHS, the Jew-controlled DHS, the Jew-controlled DHS could control your local police. And what they've done, and again, I told you about this over 10 years ago, true face of FEMA is still just irrelevant. If you get the true face of FEMA from you and you hear John Brinker lecturing law enforcement in Albuquerque at Sandia Labs, I filmed it. I made a film out of it. Then they tried to kill me. They tried to kill me. John Brinker told you that in case of a single outbreak of smallpox in a major metropolitan area, we'll need 400,000 well-armed, well-trained, organized, disciplined troops to control the American people. Because some of them just won't follow orders, yeah? Some of us won't line up on the Kmart parking lot to get a vaccination that'll give us a disease that's been eradicated in this country for 100 years. That's why they're bringing all these South Americans in, these Central Americans in. They're flying them in here to give you a whole new range of diseases. Why would they? And if they weren't, Ebola hasn't been here before, so why do we have 20 Ebola centers set up in America? Whoa. Come on. And back to your question, LWW. It was the local police. They sent a SWAT team up there dressed as teenagers to his little mountain thing because they knew he'd come in. They knew he was armed. He was always armed. And they shot him before he got back into his house, because if he got back into his house, he would have killed them all. He didn't know they were police until they opened fire on him. And this was about a week after he and I talked on my little AT&T phone that was being tapped by two Israeli companies We talked about putting his Veritas and My Free American together and working together and doing that. And so they killed him. They tried to kill Casey Netticott. Didn't quite succeed in that, but Casey hadn't talked to me since. Decided it was too dangerous, I guess. And last I heard, he was trying to get his stuff back. 70 acres that they took from him. Warm that coffee up. I'll be right back.
What's really going on in the world that mainstream media won't tell you. At Truth Radio, you can listen live or listen to a large selection of archived programs. TruthRadio.com. The truth is out there.
Those of us who are concerned about the judiciary today, about the Constitution, are sometimes arguing with each other about the issue of sovereignty. We, the people, some say, are sovereign. I am sovereign. Individually, others say. And yet, there's another side to this coin. Are we under a nation of law or men? If men are sovereign, then I guess we need a king to be the sovereign person. But that's not the way we're structured. We're supposed to not be a nation under men. We're supposed to be a nation under law. What is the sovereign law? David Whitney has a magnificent lecture on this subject. It's less than an hour long. I'd love to send you a CD with his lecture. Please send for it, the Sovereignty CD, and write to us at Post Office Box 344, Nipomo, California 93444. That's P.O. Box 344, Nipomo, California 93444.
All right, we're back, and let me do this. I want to do this here. Can I do this? Yeah. And on your back there shall stand that man, whose words will be for the voice you lack, a guide for the race of men. Yeah, I wrote that 45 years ago, folks. Now, so how exactly did the Jew manage to swindle you out of your most precious gift of being alive? His book. The Jew got your mind trapped in his collective ego with his holy book. You're now the property of Jew. You fight the Jew wars. You believe the Jew lies. On the JewTube, you agreed to the injustice in Palestine because you are a warrior for the Jew. It's only possible by believing the perverted Bible by Schofield. You can't believe that the Bible is your mortal enemy because you have failed to actually read and comprehend what the actual message is in this book. Well, here's all the proof you need. How about Romans 13? Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear in one's authority? Then do what's right and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good, but if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants and the agents of wrath to bring punishment to the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. My ass. Be a good slave. The Pharisee tells you, don't rebel against your masters. Now, this is why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Perhaps someday when everything laying ruins, everything is completely polluted and radioactive, where the Jewish civilization has left nothing alive but tortured slaves, that you might actually start to realize that something is terribly wrong with this Western culture and everyone around you. Normal people should frighten you like the zombies they are. The Bible culture is for dead people who drone on through meaningless days of work on the Jew money plantation. The Jew even makes hundreds of zombie movies, making a fistful of dollars from your ignorance. What do you see in those movies? Zombies being mowed down. Those zombies are the people of this culture, and everyone agrees that zombies should be mowed down. Why? Because the zombies are already dead. Perhaps someday, as an act of resistance and out of pure love, you start trashing every Bible you can find. You can start right now. Take action against this insane Christ culture by disposing of your Jew book. Could you do that, please? Could you actually rip a Bible in two and toss it into a dumpster? I dare you to throw a Bible away. Such an act is of tremendous significance in the holographic universe. You're symbolically telling the universe you're done being a Jew slave. The universe will read your intention and give you your next task. Killing the descendants of that evil book. But you can't trash the Holy Bible, because deep inside of your being, you're in a deep state of paralyzing fear that there might actually be a God measuring out eternal punishment in hell. You can't go against Jesus, your Savior. You're stuck in the morass of the Jew spell book. They got you good. Oh, they got you good. Now your culture is in ruin. Your nation state's bankrupt. You're morally trashed. Your morality is trashed. Your politicians and military men hoard by the Jewish beast of conquest. So if you're wondering how the Jews managed to control us through laws and managed to take over, one reason is the law, the gift of Moses, is a Jewish idea. The way external authority is established to teach the God-mem, the God who gave the Jew the law, so obey, and to not obey is to disobey God, but this is patently false. No creator God that made everything free would issue such commands. Are not all the plants and animals free? Then why are you not free? The individual is taught a false idea, God, and this God is the creator and supreme, and this deity needs your loyalty and obedience. Both would just happen to match exactly what the state wishes in a good, loyal, obedient slave. Thus, God and state are the same thing, and since everyone in the West believes in a Jewish God, state and Jew are the same. God, state, and Jew are the same thing. As the Jews took over the changed state from benign to totalitarian and welfare, the welfare state is a totalitarian state. That's the Jewish state parasitism. The Jew is a parasitic Neanderthal ape. He can only rule because you believe him as godly and divine. He isn't. He's a disgusting hellion ruled by depraved thought of conquest. The Jew, being lazy and a con artist, devises clever ways to freeload off the system. The Germans copied this total authority state under Hitler. This drove the Jews mad because the Jew is a jealous God who will not tolerate copycat totalitarian states for other tribes unless the Jew controls the state. It's like the Jews have a never-ending patent on statism. Only the Jew is allowed to rule with mechanisms of the state. The biggest fear of the Jew is that you organize the state against him like Hitler did. Can you imagine a state organized around resisting Jewish rule that doesn't use Jew money? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Iran. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So what do you want? So do you want to scare the hell out of the Jew? Get a copy of Mein Kampf and carry it around. Get a t-shirt with a quote from Hitler plastered on it in big black letters. Do you really want to scare the bejesus out of your fellow Christian sheeple slave? Get a Bible, curse it, throw it on the ground, and stomp it right in front of their frozen in horror face. The problem with the Jew is you believe in Jewish logic because of the Bible. You believe of the bullshit in the Bible because you bought the God mem. It is your immature soul that got your ego trapped. You signed on to a system of controlled thinking justice would be served. How do you like it now, dear Christian? Do you see justice or total barbarity? Stomping on the Jew Bible can be a real shock to a Christian slave. The Christian and the Jew would take offense to such an act. If you offended God himself, it's because that God is the collective ego of the Jew and the Christian control freaks. Well, that God ain't there. Just take a look around. Do you see God? Do you see a good society based on godly principles? Or do you see a bunch of deceived degenerates waving the Star of David and bombing every living thing into rubble? In the last century, the world has suffered totalitarian states. The worst was the communist revolutions like the Bolsheviks under Stalin. This extreme use of state force against the individual is a hallmark of Jewish thinking. The rabbinical class tolerates no dissent. All must obey or die. We don't need this archaic tribal philosophy. We don't want what the Jew wants. The Jew doesn't represent us. Thus, we can't have Jews in government, or lawyers for that matter. It is the Jew that wants you disarmed, and the reason is very clear. Then you can no longer resist Jewish teaching. Never give your gun to the Jew or the cop. Your gun is your only hope at having anything like freedom. The gun is the tool of freedom. With the gun, you can take your freedom back from the Jew. How do you do this? Put a bullet in the gun. Aim it, pull the trigger, far easier than using a guillotine or stringing up a Jew on a lamppost. The gun is an efficient tool. They are openly murdering us, and you are afraid of talking or defending yourself from these criminals. And from the times of Israel, they brag about Jewish politicians' lead course for tightening gun laws. Senator Joe Lieberman wants a commission to examine mass shooters. New York Mayor Bloomberg urges Obama to make gun control top of the agenda. The Jew is already running a totalitarian death camp. We have the biggest war machine in the prison state in the history of mankind. If you doubt this totalitarian argument, try not paying taxes or showing up in court, and the response will be over the top, guns and death. The state is completely, insanely jealous of the totalitarian power. You do not have the right not to play along. You need to obey or else. They take their parasitic power very seriously, which is why they must be destroyed, as J.B. Campbell would tell you. We don't need the stinking badges. Freedom requires no license or permission slip. The result of the state monopoly, especially with money, then the Jews gained control of the money and were able to subvert and bribe their way into the door and take over everything. The Jew then managed to get rid of the gold backing, and with fiat money and debt, the Jew was able to build a financial and military empire. You were co-opted all along. You thought God was in control and unconcerned on how your nation was being subverted by the Jew within. You can never let the Jew pass your border, for the Jew will certainly set up shop and destroy everything. America's doom was sealed when they let the Jew off the boat. Once people were indoctrinated into God and authority, they forgot what it was like to be free, and the state was able to incrementally take over more and more freedoms until where now the state has absolute power. All the while you stood down, completely spellbound by the memes, like a deer frozen in the headlights of an onrushing car. The Jew is rolling the DHS tanks into your town, buying up all the ammo, and you do nothing. So if we're to be free, we must overcome the ideas that enslaved us. You must overcome the trap of ego, belief in the Bible and external authority. The God in the Bible, and much of the Bible, is described as evil. The prescription of obedience is the problem. The churches were given tax-free status because they indoctrinated the masses into the sheep of the state. Religion is given a tax-free status, the same as the state. The reason might be that the church birthed the state. The state gives religion this same privilege. You were made a serf by clever use of myth. No one has the right to control you. The Jew has no right to tell you anything. The Jews are swine, not chosen like they say. How can you possibly view a Jew as divinity? Are you not paying attention to what the Jew does? If mankind is to survive the state, the Jew has to go. What that means is the Jew is a deadly contagion that has subverted the state to Judaized totalitarian thinking patterns. The Jew is killing hundreds of millions with his revolutions, false flags, lies, contrived wars, medicines, and now flying robots. You think it's okay that the skies are filled with spy satellites and drones? Where did you agree to this? We didn't. It's only the arrogant Jew has appointed himself as our God and overseer, and now the Jew is flying around the sky spying on us like God. How about a quote from Ariel Sharon? Every time we do something, you tell me America will do this and we'll do that. I want to tell you something very clear. Don't worry about American pressure on Israel. We, the Jewish people, control America, and the Americans know it. Ariel Sharon. The likelihood of a political catastrophe is extremely high. We're facing doomsday by the hand of the Jews. Thus, we as a species are facing extinction because of the Jew ape. My job is to convince you of that fact, show you what is going on so you can make a rational decision about your people's survival. In order for the human species to survive, there must be a real Holocaust, which is why the Jew projects his fear at us, knowing what is coming because of what he's doing. The Jew knows exactly what he's doing and does it anyway. He gets 94% of the DHS grants and using that stolen money to fortify his synagogues. That sounds extreme, but think. Let people think. The Jew was willing to invent the Holocaust story, brainwash the entire world, defame Germany, then extort billions from the very same people damned by the Jews. That alone should make you want to pick up a gun and start killing every damn Jew. Well, dear reader, get ready, because the world is starting to come out of the Bible trance, out of the propaganda matrix. Millions of people are waking up, their lives ruined by wars and political policies of the Jews. And when they find out the Jews did 9/11, the Jews lied us into war, then the Jews lied to them about their holy book, there's going to be hell to pay. So what are you going to do when you lose your house and job in this current depression? You must find the resolve. You must find the wild in your being, recover from Bible pussy training. You must become a warrior and no longer be the sheep and slave of the Jew. Not only do we need to wake up, we must transform back into our earlier warrior real selves. You must be activated. And that's what I'm doing now, by activating you and telling you what must be done. Tell authority to fuck off, lock and load, and sharpen your knives. This Jewish influence must be removed from state. It'd be nice if the state was removed, but with 7 billion people on the planet, I can't see how we can have a stateless society anytime soon. People need to be out of ego consciousness for Earth to be government-free. Our enemy is the state, and the state has become our deadly enemy because the Jew now controls government. The Jew thinks only in terms of totalitarian obedience and is willing to do anything to get you to obey. No one has any authority over you unless you give it to him. The Jew has no authority over you. The Jew is a maligned ape species, a Neanderthal throwback that nature tried to extinct. That is our job. We must finish off this errant species or we're doomed. You may think these words are extreme, but take a look at Gaza. Look at what the Jew Neanderthal ape is capable of. Genocide of all known Jews, and you are marked for not being a Jew. You are the Palestinian. Do not lose heart and let the rage boil up in your being. In the near future, the Jew brings hell upon our society. You will change your mind. You're changing your mind now. The Jew is the enemy. He hates us. He hates our liberty and freedom. To hell with him. It's time, folks, to send the damn Jew apes back to hell. Got some pictures here of the Neanderthal and some prominent Jews, and by God, they do look alike. All right. Not much happening in this thing here. 312. Hello, 312. You're calling from Chicago? Are you just listening to the show, or did you want to talk to me? Hello?
Hey, I was just listening to the show.
All right, sir. No problem. I'll put you back. I'll mute you again and let you listen. Continue to listen.
All right, thanks.
All right. Now let's do this. This is a film that was made back in, I believe, 2007. Anti-war activists in San Francisco Bay Area in California made this. The film's intended to counter misinformation presented in the U.S. mass media. There are differences of opinion between many of the voices in this film, but all agree that a war would not be justified.
The current situation between Iran and the United States is serious.
Iran is not the problem.
It is clearly the most serious situation since our rivalry with the Soviet Union up through the early 1980s.
This is Michael Villaleuva, V-E-I-L-U-V-A, Western States Legal Foundation. He's an activist.
It is serious because we are threatening them with first use of nuclear weapons.
The plan for Iran is targeted military strikes from the air, targeting nuclear facilities.
This is Antonia Johasic, the author of the Bush Agenda, Bush being spelled with a $sign, and she's an activist.
To create instability in Iran that would lead to an internal takeover. So it wouldn't need more troops. It's basically what it needs is the will to move forward on it. The Bush administration has the will.
We can see that the administration is doing the same damn thing that it was doing to get us into that horrible
David Glick here.
War in Iraq, and that is, it's putting out propaganda, it's misleading the public.
Vice President Cheney stood on an aircraft carrier 150 miles off the coast of Iran today to deliver a blunt message. We will stand with others to prevent Iran from gaining nuclear weapons and dominating this region.
Why is the U.S. government trying to start a war with Iran?
Basically, until 1979, U.S. and British oil companies owned most of Iran's oil. In 1979, with the Iranian Revolution, the oil companies were kicked out. Since that time, I think it's safe to argue that U.S. and British oil companies and our governments have felt that that oil really belongs to them and have been trying to get it back. It's a tremendous amount of oil. Oil is not just about the profits that would be yielded to oil companies if they owned the oil, although it is a lot about that. It's also about the global power garnered by who controls the last bits of global oil supply.
2/3 of the world's reserves of oil and natural gas is in the Middle East Central Asian region. The largest is in Saudi Arabia, the second largest in Iraq, and the third largest in Iran. Control of this region has been policy since the U.S. emerged a new world power after World War II. In order to dominate the world, we must control the world's oil, and we must not tolerate countries that show how independence and defiance of the U.S. is possible. Plain and simple, the U.S. agenda is world domination.
Please kick better. Don't do it anymore.
Are you gonna be on my side if I let you up?
Sure, Chick, sure. I'm on your side. You set me up. I'll do anything you say.
Controlling oil means you have a stranglehold on the world economy, and you have a stranglehold on countries who use oil. Either they depend on it for their economy or they import oil.
The U.S. established business and military partnerships with the dictators in the region. The Saudi royal family in Saudi Arabia, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and the Shah in Iran. The countries and their oil were under control, but with Iran and Iraq, control was lost. Something had to be done.
After September 11th, 2001, the United States, the Bush regime in particular, launched a campaign, a sort of an unbounded, unending war for greater empire under the rubric of a war on terror. The architects of that envisioned creating an unchallenged and unchallengeable U.S. empire. These neocon theorists argue that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that without the Soviet Union, without this nuclear-armed superpower confronting the United States, the U.S. reigned unchallenged militarily. And if it did not act decisively, new challenges would emerge, and it would go the way of other empires. I mean, the Russian empires collapsed twice in the 20th century. The Austro-Hungarian, the French, the British empires rise and fall increasingly quickly, and people like Paul Wolfowitz, like Dick Cheney, like Louis Libby were very aware of this. So when September 11th came, they seized on this attack. They felt they had a political opening. Again, once in a lifetime. George Bush writes in his diary that night, this was the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to launch this boundless war to reshape the Middle East and the whole world.
The U.S. invaded Iraq and removed a brutal dictator from power, a dictator that we supported through his worst crimes. Saddam Hussein was our ally until he stepped out of line and invaded Kuwait without our permission, turning him into an instant enemy. To regain control, we invaded Iraq.
Attacking Iraq was a war crime. There are only two instances in which war is legal. UN authorization, which the United States didn't have, or an imminent threat. Neither one applied. This was actually under the Nuremberg standards a war crime, the supreme crime of aggressive war. That's what this is. And of course, one of the ways I think the discourse in this country is so corrupted is everyone talks about this war as a mistake. No, it was not a mistake. It was a crime. This was a war carried out for very specific and conscious political and economic objectives. It wasn't an error. It was a crime. And the same situation applies with regard to Iran. An attack on Iran, whatever the level of development of their nuclear program is or isn't, would be a war crime.
The U.S. government is guilty of theft and mass murder. Hundreds of thousands of innocent people have been killed, millions displaced, and 100,000 fleeing Iraq every day in one of the most severe refugee crises on the planet. And a key benchmark for withdrawal is a passage of a law putting ownership of the country's oil into the hands of a few multinational energy corporations.
The only actors at this point that are likely to win the war in Iraq are U.S. oil corporations and oil industry folks. That's because the Bush administration has spent 4 years trying to change Iraq's oil industry from a nationalized model that before the war was essentially closed to U.S. oil corporations to a privatized model where essentially almost the entire Iraqi oil sector would be open to private foreign corporate ownership. And the Bush administration has been trying to do that through passage of a new oil law in Iraq so that an Iraqi government would pass the law would then be legal, and the Iraqi government would then sign contracts with U.S. oil companies, making it all on the up and up. So the slow process has been trying to get in place the right Iraqi government and then get the law passed in Iraq. The law is truly radical. Essentially, it would say before the war, U.S. oil companies didn't have access to Iraqi oil. After the war and the occupation, U.S. oil companies own the vast majority of Iraq's oil. Fairly successful use of a military by the interests of the U.S. oil corporations.
Well, we're only advisors. You make your own laws. But I think you'll find that your new law is a good law.
Iraqi leaders have not met their own political benchmarks to pass an oil law. We need to send a message to Iraq's leader that the lack of political progress is unacceptable. Hillary Clinton, August 22nd, 2007.
Gaining control of this Middle East, Central Asian region, knocking down any obstacles, whether they be in the form of anti-U.S. movements or states such as Iraq, Iran, Syria that weren't firmly under U.S. control. Once having done this and gained control of this region, Bush, Cheney, and company felt this would put the United States in a position, it would be a key element of preventing the rise of any challenger to U.S. power globally or regionally. And of course, the two main countries they've been worried about are Russia and China. Now, this is something that these people conceive of as essential to the functioning of U.S. capitalism and to the continuation of the United States' role as the world's leading superpower. This isn't a frivolous or capricious exercise in their view. Now, of course, within the ruling class, there are plenty of people who argue they mishandled it and so on and so forth. But the core view. Now, one of the great ironies here is that the United States went into Iraq, as we all know, on the basis of very naked and blatant lies. There was no intelligence failure. They knew full well Saddam Hussein was not a grave and gathering threat and that he had been largely disarmed. But they felt that Iraq would be a good first step after Afghanistan to establish themselves in the region, and from there take on Iran, take on Syria, forcibly crush the Palestinian struggle, strengthen Israel as a regional gendarme, and so on. But the irony is that Iraq has boomeranged. Iraq has actually weakened U.S. power in the region, strengthened Iran's power, and in that way actually added to the necessity they feel to take Iran down.
Now the U.S. government is building the case for another unjust war, this time with Iran. The goal once again is regime change, to reclaim Iran as a client state favorable to U.S. military and corporate interests, including non-opposition to the Israeli government. Like Iraq, we are hearing more stories about Iran supporting terrorism and more warnings not to wait for the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. There are some similarities and some differences, and once again the news media is failing to give us the information we need, preferring instead to act as a megaphone for our government.
You know, it's really important as a first step towards preventing war on Iran that people keep in mind as they hear any rhetoric that's pushing towards war to have a skeptical eye. That the history of build-ups to war, not just in Iraq or Iran, is rhetoric that is built on lies, the classic Vietnam Gulf of Tonkin, and just to not buy into it and be prepared for the big lie and be prepared not to believe it. As a great journalist from the 20th century, I.F. Stone, said when he would introduce a topic to a journalism class, he'd say, there's two words that you get out of this class, let it be governments lie.
Our country is presented as defending itself against a ruthless enemy, and to do this, we must hide any history that shows what we did to start the fight and how we escalated it until we could appear justified striking back with a crushing blow. Iran is a perfect example, and a war on Iran would amount to terrorism.
Second goal is to prevent regimes that sponsor terror from threatening America or our friends and allies with weapons of mass destruction. Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror, while an unelected few repress the Iranian people's hope for freedom. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
Iran is being positioned as the next front in the global war on terror. Despite the PR campaign to convince us otherwise, the U.S. government does not place a high priority on preventing terrorism. Before the recent Iraq war started, there was plenty of intelligence predicting that the war would increase terror, which happened as predicted.
The thing I'm most concerned about is that all these efforts on the part of the United States government are creating an atmosphere which is enhancing terrorism all around the world. There was a study that was done called the Iraq effect, and what he discovered is that the amount of terrorism has increased sevenfold times since the United States has attacked Iraq. Terrorism all around the world, and that's gonna be one of the effects if the United States attacks Iran.
The constant threat of an enemy gets hardliners the support of the population. Remember how most Americans felt on 9/11. When a country is at war, it needs a strong leader who will not appease its enemies. It must convince the population that its enemies are irrational and bent on its destruction. It works for the hardliners in Tehran, just like it works for the hardliners in Washington. This brings us to Ahmadinejad, the much maligned, ultra-conservative president of Iran. As can be expected, his unrepentant, anti-Zionist, anti-Israel displays and defiance of U.S. demands to abandon the nuclear energy program are the media focus for our official enemy.
When it comes to Iran, I think it's important that people keep Iran in perspective. Iran does have real ambitions of being a major power in the Middle East, and that's something to take very seriously. And the current president, Ahmadinejad, is somebody who loves to make provocative speeches and to do some really awful things, particularly for Jews and for Israel. The conference that was held in Tehran a few months ago, that was essentially a celebration of Holocaust denial. However, Iran tried to sort of tone that down. That's essentially what it was. This is something that really raises people's anger and is certainly seen in the whole world as very provocative. On the other hand, there is this sense that Iran is a religious fanatic country that is willing to see even have nuclear weapons fired at itself in order to wipe out Israel, and that's just preposterous. Iran has always been a rational player in world politics, which doesn't mean it's been nice, but it's pursued interests and tried to be a part of the global community. The United States has not been open to that since the revolution in 1979, but most of Europe has, and has been dealing with Iran ever since then.
There's a competition in the region for regional power. So U.S., as we all know, is trying to get footholds in Iraq, and they have presence in Afghanistan and other parts of the region. So there's a competition for who could be leading or who could be a kind of a regional power, and Iran is trying to be a regional superpower. But I don't think currently they're posing a serious threat to U.S.
Iran has always seen itself on the sidelines of Middle East politics. The vast majority of the Middle East is Sunni, but the majority of Iraq and almost all of Iran is Shia. A notable exception is Iran's Jewish population with full political rights and a seat in parliament. Ahmadinejad is worried about being perceived as aligned with the U.S. As absurd as it sounds from a U.S. perspective, the U.S.-backed Shia government in Iraq looks like conspiracy to others. His audience is mostly the Arab populations outside of Iran. By pandering to anti-Israel sentiment, he tries to present himself as a leader in the Muslim world. Ahmadinejad, a mirror image of Bush in many ways, is also trying to appeal to his base.
All right, now that was a very clever and well done Israeli propaganda piece. What they have done here, if you don't understand that, they said that they basically set a scenario up, that Iran might attack themselves with a nuclear weapon to blame it on Israel. They set us up to believe that kind of lie. This is how they work. Now this film, that was a Jewish gentleman talking, making this film for it. So while they're saying Iran in the war against thing is illegal and all that, they still set you up for this. That's pretty incredible, and it's the way they do the propaganda. They fund both sides. They play both sides against the middle. They have pretty much, the Jews have infiltrated, Israelis have infiltrated the whole Tea Party movement, and everything that they put on the Tea Party meeting while supposedly building up Republican conservative candidates are still tooting the horn and blowing the horn for Israel. Your Tea Party message is subterfuge. And that's what this document is. While they're saying Iran is not the problem, they're still setting them up. Listen.
Iranian fundamentalists in the military.
Israel might be wiped off the map.
He stands up, he says Israel should be wiped off the map.
Wiped off the map.
Eliminate Israel from the face of the earth.
Wiped off the map.
Wipe Israel off the map.
Wiped off the map.
Wiped off the map. Destruction of Israel.
Israel should be wiped off the map.
Are we going to have to wait until there's a mushroom cloud over Jerusalem?
I think one of the things that we hear about Iran that's misleading is that the president, Ahmadinejad, is said to be really the person who's in charge in Iran. And in point of fact, especially when it comes to foreign policy, it's the Ayatollah Khomeini who's really in charge. And so we get a lot of, the media tends to report when Ahmadinejad says these really crazy things like it wants to wipe Israel off the map. But what it doesn't report is when Ayatollah Khomeini says that Iran is willing to back the Saudi peace plan in the Middle East, which really is a plan to normalize relations with Israel if Israel withdraws entirely from the occupied territories in the West Bank, in Gaza, East Jerusalem. We don't hear about that. So we know that we're being set up to demonize, to think of Iran as this horrible country and really to demonize it.
What must be understood is that the office of the President of Iran is not the same as the office of the President of the United States. The media should be focusing on Ahmadinejad's boss, the supreme leader, Grand Ayatollah Khamenei. He has total power over the foreign policy, over the military, and the nuclear program.
We will never start a war. We have no intention of going to war.
Also left out of the media campaign is Iran's 2003 offer to President Bush. In exchange for being removed from the axis of evil, a guarantee of security, lifting of the sanctions, and allowing Europe to resume investing in Iran, Khamenei approved an offer to put all outstanding issues on the table. He offered to allow full nuclear inspections, to withdraw support for Hezbollah and Hamas, and to normalize relations with Israel if Israel withdraws from the occupied territories.
And Israel has not allowed any inspection of its nuclear facilities. They have nuclear-armed submarines. They used nukes on 9/11. They blew up the World Trade Center, and they were high-fiving it over in New Jersey, celebrating their attack on the World Trade Center on 9/11/2001.
The offer was delivered to Washington by a Swiss diplomat who was censured for even acknowledging it. The U.S. chose escalation over peaceful resolution. The president of Iran is somewhat of a figurehead. And in order to gain influence, he is trying to appeal to the resentment of America and Israel that is rampant throughout the region. In order to understand this hostility and why Ahmadinejad got elected, and why no leader dares to appear pro-US or even to trust the UN, it is essential to understand the history of modern Iran. For most Americans, the story begins in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis. A group of revolutionary university students took over the American embassy in Tehran and held 52 diplomats hostage for 444 days. To help burn this into the American narrative, the news show Nightline was created with a nightly tally of the number of days since the crisis started. But to really understand, we have to go back to 1953, which is where the story begins for most Iranians. This was the year that the U.S. overthrew Iran's democracy and installed the Shah, a pro-U.S. dictator. In 1951, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh was the first elected official who was appointed as Prime Minister of Iran by popular demand. He saw that the wealth needed to build Iran was leaving the country because over the past 50 years its vast oil reserves were under British control at the hands of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, later to become BP, or British Petroleum. So Mossadegh became hugely popular for nationalizing the oil industry and taking back the oil. Hugely popular at home, but quite unpopular with the British government. Britain took Iran to the World Court over the matter and lost. They tried to hit Iran's economy by blockading the Gulf and halting trade. They tried to convince the U.S. to assist with regime change, but then President Truman was not interested. However, when U.S. President Eisenhower took office in 1953, Britain was able to persuade him under the Cold War pretext that Mossadegh relied on Iran's Communist Party for power. The newly formed CIA was sent to engineer a coup, codenamed Operation Ajax. Iran's monarch, the Shah, returned to power. He had previously been weakened by the new parliament, a short democratic experiment designed to limit his powers. After 1953, he returned fully backed by UK and US power, and the oil was soon flowing under control of Britain, America, the Netherlands, and France. The Shah became increasingly arrogant, opulent, and autocratic over his 25-year rule. He instilled fear in the population with a secret police known as Savak, created by the American CIA and Israeli Mossad, that tortured and imprisoned those who dared to dissent. He crushed all political opposition. Troops were sent to massacre demonstrators. He pushed a white revolution to modernize and westernize the country, giving women the right to vote and other reforms. But ultimately, he served the elites and created a huge economic gap for the poor masses. Powerful religious leaders saw that he was forcibly trying to rid Iran of Islam in a country that was 90% Muslim. One of the Shah's leading critics, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, was arrested and imprisoned for 18 months. After his release in 1964, Khomeini was sent into exile for 14 years. From abroad, he continued his anti-US, anti-Shah campaign through sermons on cassette tapes that made their way back into Iran and circulated as people copied and shared them. By the end of the 1970s, things had gotten so bad that major protests and the violence that followed were becoming a regular occurrence. The Shah declared martial law and banned demonstrations. This resulted in a huge protest and a general strike that shut down the economy. Soon over 2 million people flooded a public square in Tehran, demanding to remove the Shah and for Khomeini to return, and that is exactly what happened. One important thing to note is that the CIA orchestrated the 1953 coup out of the very same American embassy in Tehran that was later the site of the hostage crisis, right after the Shah was overthrown by popular revolution in 1979. The students were convinced that once again the U.S. had plans to overthrow their revolution. In fact, U.S. President Carter did send a NATO general to instigate a military coup, but it failed. Iran and the U.S. had an extradition treaty in force that obligated the Carter administration to return the Shah to Iran as an indicted criminal. The students had 4 demands: return the Shah to Iran for trial, he had been accepted into America for medical treatment. Return the Shah's wealth to the Iranian people, a promise from the U.S. not to interfere in Iran's affairs in the future, and an apology and admission of guilt by the U.S. for its past actions in Iran. The apology never came, but 20 years later, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright did acknowledge the U.S. role in Mossadegh's overthrow. So Khomeini took power in 1979 and instituted a government under Islamic law. Within a year of the revolution, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran without provocation, seeking control of Iran's oil-rich Khuzestan region and key oil shipping waterways. The resulting Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988 was the longest and one of the most devastating conventional wars of the century. At least 500,000 Iranians were killed. This war further cemented resentment of the U.S. government, as they were playing both sides. On one hand, they were supporting Iraq, providing money, technology, and intelligence, including satellite photography, to help Iraqi bombing raids. The U.S. helped provide Saddam Hussein with weapons by giving him agricultural credits and pressuring Gulf states to give him billions in loans so he could buy weapons from Western Europe, China, and Russia. The U.S. Department of Commerce issued licenses to export materials for Iraq's weapons of mass destruction program. The U.S. continued its support even after learning that Iraq was using chemical weapons against Iran, not to mention against its own citizens, to stop an uprising of Kurdish separatists. But the imperialist tradition also called for maintaining regional balance of power. So the U.S. also armed Iran, not letting any one regional power get secure enough to dominate or to ally with its neighbors to challenge U.S. hegemony. In this case, it came in the form of the Iran-Contra scandal. U.S. President Reagan needed money to fund an unjustified war against Nicaragua, but was forbidden to do so by Congress. So U.S. arms were illegally sold to Iran through Israel and South Africa, and the proceeds went to the Nicaraguan Contras. This allowed Reagan to get around Congress to support a campaign of kidnap, rape, torture, and murder, for which the U.S. was convicted by the World Court for unlawful use of force. In other words, state-sponsored international terrorism. The ruling was ignored. Khomeini died in 1989, shortly after the war ended. He promised democracy, but essentially had become the next dictator. Although he improved literacy and much-needed health care for the masses, he also imposed censorship, violently crushed political dissent, and attacked women's rights. Instead of the Savak, the people now had the Revolutionary Guard to fear. Since then, Iran has been an oppressive theocracy. Khomeini was replaced by Khamenei, who remains supreme leader to this day.
All right. Folks, I'm trying to get you the truth out. I am Clay Douglas, and I am asking for your help. I'm asking you to make a donation. You may not like what I got to say, because I don't like what I got to say. I don't like having to say it. I don't like having to give you these truths. I would like to believe that Christians are the good guys, but fact of the matter is, every time I've been ripped off, every time I've let a Christian into my home, into close proximity to me, they've engineered a ripoff. They've stolen from me. And of course, it was the Christians that bragged about being a Christian that attacked me for sympathizing with Iran, sympathizing with Hamas, sympathizing, hating the Jews. You're right. I do hate criminals. I do hate people that are guilty of war crimes. I do hate people that murder children, whether they're Americans posing in uniforms as BATF or Jews wearing uniforms of IDF. And if you go to my Facebook site, Free American 69, scroll down, you can also hear soldiers with the IDF telling you Yes, Israel is committing war crimes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are right, Clay Douglas. Make a donation. Make a donation here. God bless you and keep you safe. Take in some homeless people. Get some backup to help you turn your backyard into a garden. Got instructions for you up on Free American 69. Make a donation at freeamerican.com. Get copies of the magazine. You got it.
The news that mainstream media won't tell you. Are you frustrated with your elected politicians? Get the news behind the news at truthradio.com. At Truth Radio, you can listen live or listen to a large selection of archived programs on demand. Listen when you want to. truthradio.com. The truth is out there. All you have to do is open your mind and listen.